I have been of the sighted caste for 211 years, and I am dictating this because I can no longer write. Let the order note the manner of it. My hands are steady. My mind is intact. The instrument that failed is the one the order valued, and it failed in the way the order taught us was impossible, and it will not come back. Physician Roa has told me what I already knew from the taste of the air in my skull. The silver is gone from all four lobes, burned to a fixed white curve, and behind that curve there is nothing left to be repaired. She used the old word. She said I had closed. So this finding is spoken, not written, and if my voice runs flat it is because I am reading nothing and remembering everything. Cask Ellen stands at the lip of the Ocean Deep, where the star count thins and the dusk goes so cold it stops singing. We were the ninth watch. 409 of the order lived there, 62 of us sighted, the rest technical castes who serve the salver and the pumps and the long spine of the array. The station is shaped like a hand-held palm-up. In the palm sits the great salver, a mirror of drawn barrel 1900 spans across, so smooth that it does not so much reflect the sky as consent to it. We built the salver to watch one thing. Its ledger designation is Orith 4. Everyone on the station called it Ushan's lamp, and everyone in the reach called it a matter of centuries. The lamp was a blue supergiant 41 light-years down the deep. It had begun to breathe. When a star of that mass begins to breathe, a slow, bright inhale, a slower dimming, it is shedding shells, and the shedding is the last thing it will ever do. The models of the photometric order gave it 8 to 14 years. The models had been written by observers with better eyes than mine, and revised by observers with better eyes than theirs, and the order had never in its recorded history been wrong about a lamp. I say that plainly so that the order may take its measure of us later. We were the finest eyes in the reach. That is not vanity, it is anatomy. A Suvith of the sighted caste carries 4 retinal lobes behind a lens grown, not made, and behind those lobes a mirror layer we call the silver, which takes the light the lobes have missed and hands it back to them a second time. We do not have lids. We have never had lids. The eye of a sighted is a permanent aperture, always open, always accepting, and it is the reason a child of my caste can stand on a night terrace and count the moons of a world nobody has yet named. It is also the reason that everything the eye receives, it keeps. I want that understood before I go further, because everything that follows turns on it. A Suvith eye does not heal. It is not a tissue in the way our lungs are tissue. It is an instrument, and an instrument accumulates its damage. Every glare I ever took, every arc flash, every careless slew of a mirror across a limb, each one wrote a small permanent line into my lobes, and I carried those lines for 200 years the way a stone carries scratches. The order has an entire discipline devoted to the arithmetic of it. We call it the ledger of the eye. We are taught from childhood to spend our sight carefully, because there is no earning it back. Out of that arithmetic came our doctrine, our courtesy, our law. Out of it came the article of the averted eye, which forbids a Suvith to look upon a limb without shade. Out of it came the bloom, which I will speak of at the end, when I have the courage. And out of it came our contempt for the humans, which I will speak of now, because I earned it and I should be made to say it aloud. There were 9 of them at Cask Ellen. Contract labor, hull splice and spine work, brought up on a house and freighter for a season and a half to reweld the array's outer stanchions, which the cold of the deep had been quietly eating. They kept to the low decks. They were loud in a way that was not aggressive, only constant. They ate 4 times a day. They slept in a heap of hours instead of in the 6 proper intervals, and they woke by shouting at each other in a language of consonants. The senior of them was a splice technician named Hassan Nadim, broad through the shoulders, gray coming in at the temple, a man who moved slowly and finished early. He had the habit of putting one hand flat on a bulkhead before he passed through a hatch, as though asking the station's permission. I watched him do it perhaps 400 times before I understood he was feeling for vibration. My first filing on the humans is in the station record, and I will not soften it. I wrote that the human ocular organ was a curiosity of extreme poverty. 2 lobes, no silver, an aperture that shuts down under trivial luminance, a color response with a hole in it where the useful part of the spectrum lives, a resolving power that would embarrass a house and child. I wrote that they compensate with instruments, as the blind compensate with rails. And then I wrote the sentence that physician Roa later read back to me, in a room where nobody was breathing. I wrote, most grotesque of all, they close them, voluntarily, continuously, 15 to 20 times each minute without shame, in the presence of superiors, in the presence of the sky. A species that shuts its eyes has decided in advance that there is nothing worth seeing. That is what I filed, under my name, with the order's seal. Sen Vashti Aller was 19 and had been sighted for 11 months. She had the long, straight carriage of the northern hatcheries, and she was better than I was. I had known it since her first quarter, when she resolved a companion in the lamp's glare that the salver's own photometry had smoothed into nothing. She used to argue with me about the humans, not defend them, argue. She said the blinking was mechanical, that it had a purpose, that a thing which happens 20 times a minute is not a decision but a function, and functions have reasons. I told her that the reason was cowardice, and that cowardice was still a reason. She said, then why do they look at the arc? I asked her what she meant. She said the humans welded on the outer stanchions with an arc that burned at 4,000 degrees and threw ultraviolet like a small, angry star, and that she had watched them through the gallery glass, and they lifted their masks between passes, and they looked directly at the cooling metal and at the arc's afterglow, and their faces showed nothing at all. I told her that was not looking. I told her a thing that shuts its eye does not look, it samples. I was so certain of that sentence. I hear it now the way you hear a stone drop down a shaft, counting. The slew happened on the 11th of Sethmoon, at the 4th interval. During a calibration we had run 900 times. The great salver does not turn. The station turns beneath it, and the secondary rig, the cage, we called it, a bright lattice of 41 folding mirrors that gathers the salver's light and folds it down into the gallery. The cage is what steers. To calibrate the cage, we walk a known source across it. That day the known source was the limb of Ushan's lamp itself, shaded 11 times through stacked barrel, throttled down to a thread that could not have hurt a hatchling. The 11th shade was a plate of Halcyon manufacture, 70 years in service, and it had a fault in it that no eye in the reach could have seen because the fault was in the crystal's interior, and it was 1/10 of a span wide. Master optician Rem Talley had certified the plate that season. He was Halcyon, a small species, slow-blooded, 3 eyes and all of them mediocre, which is why they make the finest lenses in the deep. They respect glass because they cannot see through their own. He signed the certificate. He was standing at my left shoulder in the gallery when the plate let go. There was no sound. I want the order to understand that there was no sound, no warning, no rising note, nothing that a body could brace against. There was the gallery, dim and blue-green and full of the smell of cold metal, 22 of us at our stations, the cage tracking, the thread of the lamp crawling steadily across the calibration wall. And then the shade opened, the way a throat opens, and 41 folded mirrors handed the unshaded limb of a blue supergiant into a room full of eyes with no lids. I remember the color. That is the obscene thing, the thing that has kept me from sleeping in a way that the pain never did. I remember that it was not white. Everyone says white. It was violet at the edges, and it had a texture, a grain, like the surface of a fluid seen too closely, and my 4 lobes drank every bit of it, and my silver caught what they missed and handed it back to them so that they could drink it a second time. The silver, our great advantage, our inheritance. It is a mirror behind the eye, and on that day it was a mirror behind the eye. I did not go blind at once. That is a mercy some of the order were not given. I went partly blind, and I stayed standing, and through the ruin of my lower lobes I watched the gallery of the 9th watch come apart. 22 sighted in that room. 9 of them were on their knees within 4 seconds, not from pain, the retina has no pain, but from the vertigo of losing a horizon. First observer Duth Calvin, who had 400 years and a voice like a hull settling, put both hands on his console and asked, in the flat administrative tone he used for supply requisitions, whether the shade had failed. He asked it 3 times. Nobody answered him because nobody could find him. Sen Vashti Allah was standing nearest the wall. She had been reading the calibration edge, which means her lobes were dilated wide to catch a thread, which means she took it open. She did not make a sound either. She turned toward where she believed the door to be, and she walked into a rack of spectrographs, and she stood there, very straight with her hand on the rack, and she said, "Senior observer, I have lost the upper 2. I have lost the upper 2. Please confirm you can hear me." I could hear her. I told her so. It was the last sentence I ever said to her while she could still see the ceiling. And in the middle of that gallery, 4 spans from the calibration wall, standing in a spill of unshaded supergiant light with a coil of splice cable over one shoulder, was Hassan Nadim. He had come up to sign a work order. He had no business in the gallery and no shading of any kind, no filter, no hood, nothing but the skin of his face and the 2 poor lidded organs the order had filed as a defect. Here is what I saw him do, from the wreck of my lower lobes, and I have gone over it perhaps 10,000 times. He shut his eyes, not slowly. It was not a decision, Vashti was right, it could not have been a decision. There was not time in the world for a decision. His eyes were shut before the light reached its full value, and his head was already turning away, and his forearm was already coming up across his face. 3 separate motions, all of them finished before I understood that the room had changed. Then he crouched. He stayed crouched, one arm over his eyes, and he counted out loud in his own language. And when he reached a number, he stopped and shouted, in reach standard, with no more urgency than a man asking for a tool. "Who's hurt? Sound off, who's hurt?" The sighted of the 9th watch, the finest eyes in the reach, knelt on the floor of their own gallery in a silence you could have stacked. And a blind thing with its eyes shut asked, in our language, whether anyone was injured. Someone got the shutter down. It took 19 seconds. Physician Isevit Roa says 19. I would have sworn to a quarter of an hour. When the gallery went dark, Hassan Nadim stood up. He kept his eyes closed for a while longer. Then he opened them and shut them and opened them, and I watched water run out of them and down his face, and I thought, with the pure clean stupidity of a man who has just been maimed, that his eye had ruptured and he was leaking. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. He said, okay, that's a bad one. Then he asked again who was hurt, and this time we told him, and he began carrying us out. Physician Roa's ward is on the 3rd deck, and by the second interval it held 41 of us, everyone from the gallery, everyone from the 2 adjoining chambers where scattered light had come through the door seam. She worked for 11 hours. She is not a young woman. Her cast is sighted, and she had been in the corridor when it happened, and she had taken enough of a reflection off a polished bulkhead to lose the edge of one lobe, and she never mentioned it once. There is not much a retinal physician can do for a suvith. She can measure. She can quantify the loss and enter it in the ledger of the eye and tell you what you now are. Roa moved down the ward with her scan cradle, and behind her a technical cast orderly wrote down the sentences. Aller, upper lobes lost, complete, no perfusion, silver ablated. Lower lobes 70%. Tally Halson, all 3 gone. He had certified the plate. He did not speak for a day and a half. Calvin, first observer, total, 4 lobes. He asked her to say it twice and then thanked her. Ardith, senior observer, lower lobes destroyed. Upper lobes 40% and falling as the silver cooked. She did not tell me the falling part. I read it in the orderly's posture. And Nadim, Hassan, human, contract, splice technician, presented at the 5th interval, 91 minutes after exposure, at his own insistence, because one of his crew told him he ought to. I was on the cradle beside his when Roa scanned him. I had perhaps a third of my sight left at that hour, and I used all of it to watch her face. She ran the standard sweep. She stopped. She ran it again with the cradle's aperture stopped down, which is what you do when you suspect the instrument is lying to you. She said, "Technician, look at the far wall." He did, she said. "Look at the ceiling." He did that. She said, "Do you understand that you were exposed to an unshaded stellar limb at 19 spans for 19 seconds? He said, "I understand it was bright." Roa is a sighted physician of 280 years, and she has read the ledgers of 11,000 eyes. She said, "Your retina is bleached across 62% of its surface. The pigment is gone. There is a burn on the you have only two. I keep expecting more. There is a burn on the left one, near the center, roughly circular, where you looked directly at the source before you turned away." "Sounds about right," he said. "You should not be able to see the far wall." "I can't really. There's a hole in it, middle of everything I look at. He made a shape with his hand, a coin, grayish, it's shrinking." Roa put down the cradle. "That is not a gesture our physicians make." "Shrinking," she said. "Yeah, it was a lot bigger an hour ago. Couldn't see my own hands first 10 minutes. Then it came back around the edges." He rubbed his face. He seemed embarrassed to be taking up her time while the ward was full of us. "Doc, is there somebody worse off you should be looking at? Because honestly, I'm just going to sleep this off." I said, "With 2 lobes gone and 2 dying, flat on a cradle in my own station's ward," I said, "Physician, the human is describing an improvement." And I said it Roa, who had spent 11 hours telling the finest eyes in the reach that they had closed, said to me in a voice I had never heard from her, "Senior observer, the human is not describing anything. I am watching it. The pigment is remaking itself. Let me be precise, because the order will want precision, and because I have nothing left to offer but precision. The scan cradle images the retina at the resolution of a single receptor. Roa took 41 exposures across 9 hours. In the first, the human's photoreceptors were spent, the light-catching molecule in them broken apart, torn open by the flood, the whole field of them dark and dead-looking, which in a Suvith means dead. In the 11th exposure, taken 2 hours later, the field was not dark. The molecules were reassembling. The broken halves were being gathered, carried into a layer of cells beneath the retina, put back together, and handed up again. There was a supply line. There was a factory. The human eye had, sitting behind it, a small patient industry whose entire purpose was to rebuild the thing the light had destroyed, and it had been running the entire time he sat there answering our questions and asking whether anyone worse off needed the doctor. It was not repair after injury. That was Roa's finding, and it took her 4 days to be willing to say it. It was the normal operation of the organ. The bleaching was not damage. It was expenditure. Every time that man looked at anything at all, at a bulkhead, at a cup, at the arc he welded with, he spent some of it, and it was bought back continuously, whether he was awake or asleep, whether he knew or not. His eye assumed that it would be overwhelmed. It was built around the assumption. It had been built around the assumption for a very long time. Roa said in the 2nd week, standing in a ward that had gone quiet in the way a ward does when everyone in it has stopped hopping, "We built an instrument. They grew a wound that keeps closing." The order did not believe us. I want that in the record too, in fairness, because I would not have believed us either. The first observer, blind, dictated a query to the photometric order at Suvith Prime, and the order replied within the month, and the reply is on file. It said that the specimen was plainly augmented. It said that human contract labor in the deep is known to carry ocular prosthesis. It said, with the particular gentleness the order reserves for observers who have been maimed, that trauma is known to produce errors of interpretation, and that physician Roa should re-examine her cradle for a calibration fault. Roa had already re-examined the cradle. She had scanned the other 8 humans. She had scanned the house and crew of the supply freighter. She had scanned herself. The other 8 humans showed the same industry, idling, quietly turning over. None of them had been in the gallery. None of them had ever been augmented. The freighter's manifest carried their medical certificates, and their eyes were their own, poor and lidded and defective, and every one of them was in the middle of buying its sight back from an ordinary day. The Halcyon showed nothing of the kind. The Suvith showed nothing of the kind. It was not a deep thing. It was not a mammal thing, whatever a mammal is. It was theirs. So the order sent a second instruction, and this is the one that put me in a room with Hassan Nadim for 6 days, and it read, "Take the specimen's testimony." He did not want to give it. He said this in the plainest way, sitting across a table from a blind astronomer, in a briefing chamber with the lamps turned all the way up because the lamps no longer made any difference to me. He said, "Sir, with respect, I fix stanchions. I've got 106 meters of spine to re-weld before the freighter comes back. And every hour I sit here is an hour I'm not doing that. And this station's got 400 people on it who can't see, and the spine is what's holding the pumps." I told him the order had instructed me. He said, "Yeah, all right." And then he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Sorry about your eyes. Nobody said that to you, have they?" Nobody had. It is not a thing the sighted say to one another. There is no formula for it because there is nothing to be done, and a Suvith does not waste words on the fixed. I did not have an answer for him, and so I began the interview. 6 days. I have all of it. Roa's orderly took it down, and I have had it read to me until I could recite it. I asked him what a human does when a light is too bright. He said, "Blink, look away. It's not a thing you do, it just happens, faster than you can think about it." I asked him how fast. He said he didn't know. He said, "Fast enough that I've never once managed to see something bad happen up close. My whole career. Slag pops out of a weld, comes at your face. You never see it hit the mask. It's already dark by then. Understand what I am hearing, sitting there with 4 ruined lobes. The organ commits an act of self-defense before the mind is informed. It does not consult. It does not weigh the value of what might be seen. It closes, and the closing is the price of the organ's survival, and the price is paid so cheaply and so constantly that the man could not tell me the amount." I asked him whether it did not shame him. I asked it in the order's phrasing, which is, "Does the closing not diminish the sighted?" He thought about it a while. He is not a fast man, and I came to understand that this is not slowness. He said, "Where I'm from we've got a sun, and you can't look at it. Everybody knows you can't. It's the first thing anyone tells a kid." He turned his cup around. "So of course every kid tries." I asked him to explain. "You look at it," he said, "on a dare. Half a second, 1 second, and then you can't see. There's a green blob in the middle of the world and it follows you around. You look at your mother and there's a hole where her face is. And you're 8 years old and you are certain, you're absolutely certain you've done it. You've ruined yourself forever. And by dinner it's mostly gone," he shrugged. "By the next day it's gone, and you never do it again. That's the lesson, right? That's how everybody learns it." I did not speak for some time. He must have taken it for confusion, because he explained further, kindly, the way you explain the obvious to the injured. "You get the scare," he said. "You get the whole thing, the terror, the blindness, the certainty, and then you get it all back, so you know exactly what it's worth." Senior Observer Kellan Ardith of the photometric order did not say what he was thinking. Here is what he was thinking. A human child is issued a rehearsal of blindness. It is issued at no cost. It is returned to sight, and it carries for the rest of its life the memory of having been blind and the certainty of having recovered. And out of that memory, it builds a relationship with light that no Suvith has ever had or could ever have. We do not rehearse. We have one performance. Every sighted child is taught the ledger of the eye before it is taught its letters, and it grows up knowing that its sight is a fixed quantity in a jar, and that everything it ever looks at, it pays for out of the jar, and the jar is never refilled. That is why the sighted are careful. That is why the sighted are courteous. That is why we built the article of the averted eye, and why our children walk the night terraces with their heads down and their hands out. It is why we are cowards, and why we called them cowards for having lids. I asked him about the arc. He brightened, the way any technical cast brightens when you ask them about their work. He explained that the splice arc runs at a temperature that would sublime the barrel of the great salver. He explained the mask, which is a plate of glass that darkens itself in a fraction of an instant and lifts again. He explained that the mask sometimes fails, and that when it fails, you get what the humans call an arc-eye, which he described as feeling like sand under the lid for a day and a half. He said, you go home, you tape a cold cloth over it, you sleep, you go back to work. I said, and your sight comes back. You have looked directly at an arc. Everybody's looked at an arc. You look at it when you strike it before the mask goes, every single weld, thousands of times. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. It's not good for you. I'm not saying it's good for you. My eyes at 50 aren't my eyes at 20. But there's damage, and then there's damage. Most of what happens to a human eye in a day, it fixes overnight. It's built to be knocked down. Built to be knocked down. I asked, because I was still order enough to ask, whether his people had built it that way. No, he said, surprised. No, nobody built it. It's just what we came out of. Snow. You don't have snow, do you? Water frozen, a field of it and the sun on it, and it throws everything straight back up into your face. Lightning does it too. Sun on the sea. My people were walking around in all that for a very long time before anybody thought about a mask. He spread his hands. So either you go blind by 20 and you don't eat, or you've got an eye that comes back. That's the whole story. That's not clever. That's just what's left standing. That is not what is left standing, I thought. That is what walks toward the light on purpose. Because that was the last thing, and I put it to him on the 6th day, and I recorded the answer with my own voice into the station log, and I have listened to it enough times that Roa took the recording away from me. I said, technician, when the shade failed, every sighted in that gallery was looking at the calibration wall, so were you. When the light came, all of us continued to look, because our eyes had no choice and our training had no doctrine for it. You turned away in a fraction of a second and you covered your face. And then, 91 minutes later, when the shutter was down and your crew had you sitting on a deck plate, you asked physician Roa's orderly to bring you to the gallery. Why? And Hassan Nadim, who fixes stanchions, said, to see how bad it was. He said it flatly. He said it the way a man says he checked the weather. He had been blinded 90 minutes earlier, in a room full of maimed strangers, by a star. And when his sight came crawling back around the edges of the gray coin, the first thing he did with it, the first thing he spent it on, was to walk back into the room that had taken it and look. Not because he was brave. I put that to him in the order's language, and he was embarrassed, and he said he was not, and he was telling the truth. He looked because his eyes had come back before, and he expected them to come back again. He looked the way a man puts his hand into cold water. He looked because for a human being, blindness is a thing that happens to you on a Tuesday and is gone by Thursday. And he had been looking into things that hurt his eyes his entire working life, and every single time, the eye had picked itself up and gone back to work and asked for the next thing. We had studied their strength. We had studied their gait and their endurance and the mad temperature they hold their bodies at. We had 11 volumes on the human hand. Nobody in the Reach had ever written down that a human's blindness has an end. Ushan's lamp went early. It went 4 years and 103 days after that interview, which is to say it went 8.5 years before the earliest date in the order's models, and the order will spend a century deciding whose arithmetic was at fault. I do not care. I have never cared less about anything. The great salver was pointed at it. Of course it was. That is what the salver was for. 409 of us on Cask Elon, and every instrument on the ninth watch aimed down the deep at a star that we had been promised would breathe for another decade. There is a phenomenon the models call shock breakout. When such a star finally collapses and rebounds, the shock front runs up through the body of the star and reaches the surface. And for a period of some minutes the star is not a star anymore. It is a flashbulb the size of a solar system. 41 light-years is nothing. 41 light-years is arm's reach. What arrived at Cask Elon that day was not a supernova as the histories draw them, a slow flowering over weeks. It was the flash. It was the first minutes, and the salver had 1900 spans of barrel waiting to catch it and fold it down into a station full of people with no lids. The shutters were rated. The interlocks were rated. Every shade in the stack was rated, and the ratings had been calculated by observers with better eyes than mine against a source that the models said could not exist for another 8 years. Everything held for 6 seconds. It takes 22 seconds for the emergency stack to close. I was not in the gallery. There is no mercy in that. I was in the spine, in the long axial corridor, and the corridor has a viewing slot the width of my hand, and I was walking past that slot with 2 ruined lower lobes and 40% of my uppers when the light came up the deep. I did not see the lamp. Nobody saw the lamp. There is nothing in that flash to see. It is not an image, it has no shape. It is the abolition of shape. It came through a hand's width of unshaded slot from a source 41 years gone, and it went into my uppers, and my silver caught what they missed and handed it back, and my sight ended. Not dimmed. Ended with a sound in the skull like a struck bell, and then a white curve, fixed, permanent, sitting exactly where the slot had been. I have it now. I will have it when I die. It is the last thing I will ever see, and it is a shape burned into a mirror that was behind my eye, and I am told it is quite beautiful, a bright crescent like a lamp seen through a doorway. 62 cited on the ninth watch. Physician Roa's final ledger records that 58 closed completely within the hour, and the remaining 4 within the day, as the silver cooked what the lobes had left. The technical casts fared better, and it did not save them, because in a reach station the technical casts do not read instruments. 900 spans of corridor, the pumps, the spine, the shutter interlocks jammed open on a fused command line. The salver still pointed at a thing that would go on getting brighter for 2 more days. 409 of us, in the dark, in a hand-held palm up to a star that had just stopped existing. And 9 humans on the low decks, who had felt the light come up through the deck plates in their feet, and had done what they had been doing since before they had a word for it. They had blinked. 6 of them had been asleep. 2 were in the galley, and one of those, a rigger named Teodor Anya, was looking up at a viewport with his mouth full of food when it happened, and he lost most of a day to a gray coin the size of the world, and he came back. Hassan Nadim was on the outer spine in a work suit, welding, with a mask over his face that darkens in a fraction of an instant. He says he does not remember whether it darkened in time. He says the flash came around the sides of the mask and off the metal in front of him, and that he shut his eyes and put his forearm across the visor and clamped the safety line, and then he lay down along the stanchion he had been welding on his back on the shadow side, with his eyes shut, and counted. He was blind for 11 hours. He says it was the worst of his life, and I believe him. The gray coin filled everything. He could not see his own glove against the stars. Roa's later scan found the burn, a broad crescent seared across both retinas where the light had come around the mask edge, permanent, unhealing, a piece of his sight taken from him forever, which he will carry for the rest of his days as I carry mine. Around that crescent, the rest of it came back. He got himself along 106 meters of spine in the dark by feel, one hand flat on the metal, asking the station's permission. He came in through the maintenance lock. He found the low decks and his crew, and then, without instruction from anyone, because there was nobody left with authority to instruct him. The humans of Cask Ellen began the thing that will be argued about in the Reach for 100 years, and the thing I have been dictating this finding in order to say. They read the dials for us. That is all. There is no other way to put it. 9 contract laborers with defective eyes walked a station of 400 blind Suvith and Halson through 11 days, because the pumps needed watching and the shutter needed cutting free, and the spine needed a hand on it, and every gauge and every readout and every warning glyph on Cask Ellen was a thing that had to be looked at. Hassan Nadim could not see the gauges for the first 11 hours, so he had Anya read them, whose sight came back in 9. And when the Sunside heat exchanger began to run away in the second day, and the only manual override is a wheel behind a window in the primary gallery, in the direct path of the salver's fold, in a room where the light of a dying star was standing like a solid object. He went in. He went in with a welding mask, a survival hood, and a piece of Halcyon shade plate wired across the visor, and he shut his eyes, and he crossed 19 spans of that room by memory, counting his steps, and he opened his eyes twice, for less than a second each, to find the wheel and to read the pressure. And he came out with a fresh burn on top of the old one, and he sat on the deck for a while with his hands over his face. And when he could see again, he asked Roa's orderly whether anyone worse off needed the doctor. I was there for that. I mean, I was in that corridor. I could not see him. I heard a man breathing and I heard him ask. First observer Duth Calvin died on the 9th day, of causes the physician has recorded, and I will not put them in this finding out of respect for 400 years of service. Master optician Aurem Talley is alive. He has begun grinding lenses again, by touch, and he tells me his work has improved, and I think he is telling the truth, and I think it is the cruelest sentence anyone has ever said to me. Sen Vashti Allah is alive. She has taken up the ledger of the eye, which is now the discipline of the whole station. She asked me last week to strike from the station record my first filing on the humans, the one with the sentence about closing, and I told her that I would not. I want it in the record. I want the order to read the sentence. A species that shuts its eyes has decided in advance that there is nothing worth seeing, and I want the order to read it in a finding submitted by an observer who cannot read it himself. Because here is what I have understood, at the end of 211 years of the finest sight in the Reach. We did not build our doctrine on our strength. We built it on our fear. Our eye is a jar and the jar cannot be refilled, and so every institution we have ever made is a machine for not spending. The article of the averted eye is not a courtesy. It is a flinch that took 900 years to write down. Our terraces face down. Our children are taught to be frugal with the sky. We conquered 9 species, and not one of them was ever destroyed, because destruction is expensive and there is a cheaper thing, and the cheaper thing is the bloom. I have avoided this, and I will avoid it no longer. The bloom is not a weapon in the way the Reach describes it to the tribunals. It is a light. It is a shaped charge of light, and it is deployed above a city or a column or a fleet, and it does not kill anyone. It removes the eyes of everyone beneath it, permanently, in the 10th of a second before any organ in the known deep can respond. That is the whole of it. That is the entire military history of the Suvith Reach. We arrive, we open a lamp above you, and afterward you are governed. Because a population that is closed cannot farm, cannot fight, cannot read a gauge, cannot cross a room, and must be fed by whoever is holding the spoon. 9 species, 900 years, not one of them ever came back. The Reach believes that the bloom is a law of nature. The Reach believes that sight is a jar, because every eye the Reach has ever met is a jar, and the Reach has built a civilization, a diplomacy, a doctrine, and a governing philosophy on the proposition that when the lamp is lit above you, the argument is over. Against a human being, the bloom is a Tuesday. Say it precisely, because the order will want precision and the order will not want to hear this. It is not nothing. It would maim them. It would take a crescent from every one of them and never give it back, and there would be a burn at the center of their sight for the rest of their lives, and some of them, the ones who looked straight into it, would lose more than that. I am not telling the order that humans are immune. Nadim has a crescent. He will die with it. I am telling the order that, in 11 hours, they would begin to see the edges of things. I am telling the order that, in a day, they would be reading gauges. I am telling the order that we would open a lamp above a human city, and we would land, expecting the spoon and the silence and the 900 years, and we would walk into streets full of people sitting with cold cloths over their eyes, counting, and one of them would put a hand flat on a wall and feel for the vibration and go looking for us. And they would have done it before, every one of them at 8 years old on a dare. Physician Roa asks me whether it is not in the end a small thing, a layer of cells, a molecule that comes apart and is put back together in the dark, behind the retina in perfect silence, whether the man is awake or asleep, whether he knows or not. I tell her yes, it is a very small thing. It is the smallest thing in the deep. It is nothing at all next to a mirror of drawn barrel 1900 spans across, and it is nothing next to 4 lobes and a silver, and I would not have traded my eye for his on any day of my life before the 11th of Sethmoon. But every doctrine the Reach possesses stands on one unexamined sentence, and I filed that sentence myself, under my own name, with the order's seal, that a creature which closes its eye has decided there is nothing worth seeing. The truth is the reverse, and it took the loss of everything I had for me to see it. They close because they intend to open again. The lid is not a surrender. The lid is a promise made to the eye by the rest of the body. Shut, and I will pay for what you spent, and you will look again by morning. Every blink is that promise being kept, 15 to 20 times a minute, from the first day of a human life to the last. They are the only species in the deep that has ever been able to afford to look directly at the thing that hurts them, because they are the only species that has ever been able to afford to lose. We have spent 900 years being the ones who look. They are the ones who look again. On the 14th day, when the freighter came and the station was under tow, and the salver was a blind palm still open to a bright new hole in the deep, I sat in the spine corridor near the slot, because it is where I go now, and I asked Hassan Nadim to describe the lamp to me. He was quiet a while. Then he said it was not really a lamp anymore. He said there was a small hard point, and around it a shell going out, and the shell had a green in it he did not have a word for, and it was not beautiful exactly, and it was the only thing in the sky. I asked him how long he could look at it. He said, not long, it's still too bright. Couple seconds, then I've got to look away and let it come back. I said, and how long does that take? And he said, minute or two. And then, because he heard something in the silence, because he was a decent man and I have never once heard him boast, he said quietly, Sir, I'm sorry about your eyes. I keep saying it. There isn't a better thing to say. I told him there was not, and that he should stop. Then I asked him to look again and tell me what he saw, and he did. And I sat beside him in the corridor with a white crescent burned across the mirrors behind my eyes, listening to a man with the poorest sight in the Reach describe the death of a star that I had spent my life waiting to watch. He described it 4 times over the following hour. Each time he had to stop and let his eyes come back, and each time they came back, and each time he said apologetically, "Okay, give me a minute." That is the finding of the 9th watch. Let the order file it under the ocular ledger, where my first sentence about the humans is already filed, and let the 2 be read together. Withdraw the bloom. It has never been a weapon. It has been an accident of who we happen to meet. And strike the word defect from the human ocular entry. I have no word to replace it with. Our language does not contain one, because our eyes have never needed the concept, and a species does not invent a word for a thing it has never once been given. The humans have a word. I asked Nadim for it on the last day before the freighter took them off, and he had to think about it because he had never in his life been asked to name it. It is not a technical term. It is the ordinary word they use for what happens to a cut, or a bone, or a bruise, or a man. He said it heals. He said it the way you would say that water is wet. He said it, and then he went back down to the low decks and slept for 11 hours, and when he woke he could see, and he did not think about it, and he never has. Record that. Record all of it. Record that the sighted of cask Ellen watched the finest eyes in the reach close forever in the light of Ushan's lamp, and that the last instrument still operating on the ninth watch was a defective, lidded, two-lobed organ belonging to a man who fixes stanchions, and that it was not operating because it was strong. It was operating because it had been broken so many times, so cheaply, so completely and so long ago, that its owner had stopped counting.